afternoon. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us today. If you'd like to tell us who you are and what you're going to talk about, and then press on, the screens are all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Clive, and I am one of the trustees of the charity Climate Change Gardening. And look, I'll go on to share screen just so we can start to see some pictures here. Um, Here we go. Let's bring that up onto full screen.
We can see the PowerPoint screen, but not the slideshow yet.
Okay, that has that
There
come
we
onto the
go. Yeah.
slideshow now?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are. You're all
Okay.
set.
Good. Thumbs up, I see. Very good. So, yeah, but basically, I'm one of the trustees of Climate Change Gardening, the charity Climate Change Gardening. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I suppose, I'll tell you a little bit about our organisation and a little bit about land use in the UK and gardening specifically. And then probably I'll talk a little bit about the sort of things that gardeners can actually do to help mitigate climate change. And so we'll run through that, and then perhaps I'll just tell you a bit more. I'll finish off by telling you a little bit more about what climate change gardening, what our organisation actually does. Just to start with, a kind of a potted history, I suppose, of climate change gardening. Where we came from, and it started off at a local gardening club. I'm a member of a local gardening club, and I think we had a speaker talk to us about climate change and gardening in a general sort of way. And after the presentation, we talked amongst ourselves and thought, well, we ought to do something. I think that was the general feeling. We should do something. We can't just sit back and watch climate change unfold. So we teamed up with a number of other local gardening clubs with like-minded individuals, and we decided that we ought to hold a sort of climate change gardening event of some sort. And so we got some speakers in from the local wildlife trust and a specialist on climate change and so on and so forth. And we organised an event, about 20 different organisations to bring a stand along. And we had this event. It was a lot of work. It probably took us 6 months of, I wouldn't say full-time work, but it seemed a lot of time went into it. But the event went off well. We were kind of pleased with it, and people said, "Oh, you ought to do another one. You should take this seriously and get yourself organised properly." So we thought somebody said we should become a charity, so we followed that idea, and we created a constitution. We had one of the trustees has a friend who's a solicitor who happened to specialise in charity law. So she helped us create a constitution, and we applied for charitable status. 20 something, 28 pages of questions from the Charity Commission. People said, "Oh, you'll be backwards and forwards for months and months and months with them." But luckily, we just got an email 2 months later saying you're in, and you're now a charity. So we're now a charitable incorporated organisation. We have 5 trustees. It's called our type of CIO, the foundation CIO. We don't have members. The organisation is run entirely by the trustees. So what do we aim to do? Well, we aim, I suppose, initially to raise awareness of the impact that climate change is having on gardens. But more importantly than that, more urgently than that, we aim to encourage gardeners to do things with their gardens that will help soften the impact of climate change and perhaps even mitigate climate change itself. And we thought we needed some funding. We had a little bit of money left over from our event in the summer of 2023, but we needed a bit more than that, we felt. So we applied to the South Cambridgeshire Zero Carbon Communities Fund. And so we got a very helpful sum from them, which has enabled us to keep going and buy bits and pieces that we need and so on. So we're very grateful to them. And so we became a charity last year. We were involved in a number of events and presentations through last year, but particularly in the second half of it. This year, we've got 20 something events and talks that we've been invited to attend and go to and give and so on. This week, as it happens, we've got 5 talks to give. Did one on Monday, 2 today, 1 tomorrow, and 1 on Saturday. I think that adds up to 5 anyway. So there's a kind of potted history of us, not because it's any sort of big deal, but I thought just might be interested in seeing how charities happen to start off as a bunch of like-minded people having a kind of idea, and then one thing leads to another, and suddenly there you are with a charitable status and some funding from the local authority. But anyway, let's move on to gardens, and perhaps we'll have a quick look at land use itself. And some of you may be very familiar with this. If you go onto the Department for Levelling Up website, they have statistics on how land is used in the UK. And not surprisingly, agriculture is far and away the biggest land use of 63%. Next comes forestry, open land and water. So that's national parks and forestry commission and so on and so forth, another 20%. And then I think this surprised us when we looked into it and sort of empowered us really to keep going forward, was that the third biggest land use category in the UK are residential gardens, 5%. Now, you might think, oh, 5% is not a very big slice. And of course, it's not a massive slice compared to agriculture, but it still adds up to 4,000 odd square kilometres, more than all the national nature reserves put together, and about, or slightly less than, it's almost twice the area of Suffolk. I happen to live in Suffolk, which is why I chose Suffolk, but you can do the maths relative to your county should you want to. So gardens do add up to a significant chunk. And whereas, when it comes to climate change, which is what we're concerned about, agriculture is, we hope, being well handled by DEFRA in terms of what to do about climate change. And the forestry and open land and water is, again, presumably being handled by the appropriate government agency. Residential gardens, there isn't a kind of central organisation helping gardeners achieve net zero or whatever the particular target is. So that's the kind of almost like the vacuum we found ourselves stepping into. So let's have a look at UK gardens and indeed the people doing the gardens. About 87% of UK households have access to private gardens, have a private garden, which means that one household in 8 doesn't. That proportion will vary enormously from place to place. In rural areas, the proportion will be higher. If we take some, inner city boroughs, then of course the proportion with access to private gardens will be a lot less. So how big are those gardens? Well, the UK average is something close to 200 square meters, but again, lots of variation. If we looked at inner city gardens, where people have them at all, it's about 60 square meters. It might be 2.5 times that in the suburbs. And if we go to rural areas, a figure of 400, 500 square meters would be quite typical. The Office for National Statistics has an interactive page where you can select any area you want in the country and see the average garden size in that area of the country. So that's been quite useful for us. So how many people are actually involved in gardening? Well, there's about 20 odd million people claim to be gardeners. So that's a lot of folk. The age band that does most gardening is the sort of 55 to 70-year-olds. But lots of gardening goes on in other groups as well. So it's quite a busy area. Now, coming down to, it's easy to think of gardeners as being like a stripy lawn and pruned rose bushes, but actually the kind of the green, the green outdoors is a significant part of gardening for a lot of people. 80% of adults, and this is a study carried out by, or a survey carried out by YouGov on behalf of the Horticultural Trade Association, 80% of adults want to see more wildlife in their garden. And for over a third of people, they say that wildlife is the best bit of their garden, which again, I was surprised by, but kind of comforted. So the gardening community is quite a green focused community overall. So I've said that there isn't an official body that looks after private domestic gardens. But what do we know about it? Well, maybe the closest thing we've got is the Royal Horticultural Society, and they published a report back in 2017, so 8 years ago now, called Gardening in a Changing Climate, where they tried to assess the impact of climate change on gardens and so on. It was only 2017, which to me doesn't sound a long time ago, but actually when you read the report, it feels very dated now. You will know that back in summer of 2022, the temperature hit 40 degrees in various places in the east of England. Now, when you read this report, 40 degrees seems like a distant prospect, not something that was just around the corner. But anyway, it's a useful document, but it's not really aimed at gardeners. It's quite a scientific document, really. So it's interesting. But anyway, the point is, what do they say about gardeners and climate change? And I've just got this sort of quote here, and I'll read this out to you. With over half of UK adults engaged in gardening, there's great potential for this group to help with biodiversity and make a major contribution to reducing carbon dioxide emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change. So this little quote out of that RHS publication, again, we found very empowering, and others do too. The RHS is saying that these 20 odd million gardeners who together look after well, it's almost 2,500 square miles of land, have a lot of potential to help make a difference. So, what are the sorts of things that gardeners can do to soften the impact of climate change? And I'm just going to skate through some of those quite rapidly now. I'm not going to go into lots of detail because it's not that sort of talk. But if we looked at the sort of utility areas first, well, collecting rainwater would be something that many gardeners are doing already to some extent, and indeed gardeners could do a lot more of this. And why is this important? Well, water supply, mains water supply, is already precious, and it will be increasingly precious as climate change, continues and accelerates. And and it's not just reducing the pressure on the mains water itself; it's reducing the pressure on aquifers. Certainly here in Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, in the east of England, and probably other areas of southeast England too, there is significant abstraction and depletion of the water stored in the aquifers under the ground due to abstraction for water supply. And as a result of that, chalk streams, for example, are drying up, and the fauna and flora associated with chalk streams is being depleted by this high level of abstraction. And even in the east of England is quite a low rainfall area. Well, it's the lowest rainfall area of the UK, but even here in the east of England, a modest sized shed will collect a lot of water over the course of the year. I mean, where I live in Suffolk, we get about 600 millimeters of rain a year, which equates to 600 litres of rain per square metre. So if you had a 10 square metre shed roof, which isn't particularly big, three and a bit metres by 3 and a bit metres, you're going to collect 6,000 litres of water over the course of the year. So it's not so much about the shortage of rain for gardeners, it's about the ability to store it. And this picture here, of course, is an IBC that holds 1,000 litres. That's not for everybody, but it certainly is possible to collect really significant quantities of rainwater from shed roofs, garden, greenhouse roofs, and so on, and use them on the garden instead of using main water. And staying with the kind of utility area, what else is it that gardeners can do? Well, shading is important, and everybody knows shade's important. My dog knows that shade's important in hot weather. But the importance of shade, particularly in urban areas, 80% of Britain's population live in urban areas, and shade is really important at keeping urban temperatures down during heat waves. And the effect of shade prevents the asphalt and the tarmac and the concrete and paving and so on from heating up, so helps keep those urban areas cool. And the transpiration from the foliage as well in itself will help cool the surrounding area. So if you have a tree-lined street in an urban area, and you have the next street across which doesn't have trees lining it, that tree-lined street will be measurably cooler, 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees cooler during hot weather than the similar street without trees. I mean, you remember back in 2022 when folk were advised to stay indoors and pull the curtains during hot weather, and it was exactly those times when shading, from foliage and pergolas and trees and so on was important. And it's worth remembering as well, during that 2022 heat wave when it hit 40 degrees, human excess deaths in the UK were just a shade under 3,000. So, we're not just talking about keeping ourselves comfortable, we're talking about an impact on human survival during these heat waves. And the heat waves, of course, are predicted to become longer and more intense. So, gardening can have an impact on these sort of utility functions. Or wildlife, of course, is another key area. And many people, when we talk about climate change gardening, they say, oh, it's all about wildlife, isn't it? And we've got a bird box and a bee hotel, and of course, that's great. But there's more to it than that. In supporting insects, gardeners can help have a provision of nectar through their choice of flowers that lasts from, well, now, from February, March, right through to early autumn. And that'll help support a broad range of insects. And you'll know people talk about how insect numbers have plummeted in the UK and indeed elsewhere as well. And the more we can do to support insects, pollinators, then the better that is. Climate change is part of that. It's not the only factor responsible for the decline, but it's certainly part of that. And there's a study came out towards the end of last year showing that even in rural areas where we might think there's lots of greenery and there's lots of good stuff for insects, gardens were really, really important for pollinating insects because they had flowers and nectar and pollen throughout the year, whereas the fields, agricultural fields, if they had any nectar available at all, it was only, perhaps a 2-week period when the oilseed rape was in bloom or the field beans were in bloom, whereas gardens provide that supply right through the year. But so it's nectar. You will have heard of No Mow May, and this sort of movement to encourage gardeners to leave some of their lawn long anyway, and that long lawn will, greatly improve biodiversity, and larger plants will have deeper roots, which will push more carbon into the soil as well. So it's not just biodiversity, but that's a good part of it. The butterflies and the wildflowers and so on that will become attracted and grow in long lawns. A pond, of course, again, is another way of greatly improving local diversity. There's been a big reduction in the number of ponds across the landscape as a result of agricultural intensification or just changes in agricultural practice. Ponds used to be in the corner of most fields or many fields in order to water livestock. And livestock, certainly here in the east of England, has gone now from large areas. Ponds are not needed, so they're filled in or they just dry up. And ponds, it's not just about aquatic wildlife. It's not just about the damselflies and frogs and so on, but every other animal, or certainly the larger animals, need to drink just like we do. So hedgehogs, just for example, but you could think of every other mammal as well. They need to drink. So having ponds providing water for hedgehogs and all those other animals saves them having to roam around the suburbs looking for water and crossing roads in the process. And as you know, falling foul of the traffic while they're trying to cross the road. So ponds are important. Large numbers of ponds have been lost since, let's say, the Second World War. And even jumping back to the lawns, you will have seen this figure that 97% of Britain's wildflower meadows have been lost since the Second World War, again due to agricultural intensification. So even a small part of a garden left to lawn and wildflowers is an improvement. And it's important to think of these measures not just as something that individual gardeners do in their little mini oasis of their, whatever it is, 100 square meters at the back of their house, but to think of it as a patchwork of habitats joined up across urban areas or suburban areas or whatever it is. And we talk increasingly about green corridors. And of course, we can't force people to get on board with this kind of greening movement, but certainly sort of community measures. We will encourage communities to work together to create a joined up patchwork which enables wildlife, whether it's hedgehogs or dragonflies or butterflies, to disperse from one green patch to the next green patch to the next one, and so become more resilient in the process. So what else can gardeners do? What else do we talk about? Well, we've talked about the sort of utility stuff. We talked about wildlife. Gardeners can actually actively reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and switching away from peat would be a big part of that. You'll know that peat is a massive carbon store, and yet when it's dug up and sold through garden centres, much of that carbon that's in the peat oxidizes off into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, as a greenhouse gas. We're now seeing, as that bottom photograph shows you, a very significant move now through garden centres and supermarkets and so on to only offer peat-free compost, which of course is a good thing. What else can we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Well, obviously switch away from petrol-powered garden machinery. There's plenty of electrical powered equipment out there, and the portable batteries. The sort of the cable, what do you call it? The not wireless, um, the battery powered garden equipment is now very good. The batteries are a lot lighter than they used to be, and of course there's still the manual stuff. I've switched back to manual clipping of my hedge, and there is a move in some garden clubs to share equipment, so to minimise purchase of garden equipment and share it between them, which of course is good for the planet as well. And you might well have heard of no dig gardening, which is another way of keeping carbon in the soil, because every time we dig the soil, just like extracting peat, every time we dig soil, we expose the carbon in the soil to the atmosphere, and that oxidizes away to degrees as carbon dioxide. So no dig gardening has moved from being a kind of fringe activity to a mainstream event now. I'd say there are lots and lots of gardeners we talk to that don't dig now but use surface mulch instead. So various things and more that gardeners can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But already, as you know, the reason we're seeing climate change unfolding is because there's already now too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and indeed other greenhouse gases as well, uh, too much in the atmosphere, so that, as a result, climate change is underway. So what can gardeners do to actually reduce the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? The classic things that communities are encouraged to do, like put solar panels on the roof, get an electric car, perhaps put in a heat pump, and all those kinds of measures are all absolutely great, and we totally encourage them. But none of those pull carbon dioxide out of the air, whereas every bit of green leaf, grass, and the rest of it is pulling carbon dioxide out of the air as a result of photosynthesis. So, we would encourage gardeners to green as much of their part of the landscape as they can, and trees and shrubs and perennials are much better than annual plants, because annual plants require planting and digging and replanting and lots of disturbance of the soil, whereas gardens, beds that are comprised largely of perennials, require much, much less digging, and you'll end up with carbon being fixed by all that foliage, and either remaining within the wood of the plant itself or falling to the ground and being pulled back into the soil by earthworms and so on. So carbon capture is very much something that gardens can do, and can increase the amount of greenery through growing climbing plants up otherwise bare walls or bare fences and so on. So we have a greater area of greenery that's involved in photosynthesis. And as well as that, gardeners can create their own compost and use this as a surface mulch. Up until recently, the tradition amongst the gardening community has been to dig compost into the garden, into the soil, whereas now we've moved more in the direction of using surface mulches. Don't do the digging, put the mulch on the top, and let the earthworms and other soil invertebrates do that job for you. So carbon capture is very much something gardeners can get involved with. So just to finish off, last slide almost, I think, probably. So what do we as a charity actually do? So I'd just like to run through some of those things quickly. We've got a website, and I'll give you the address in a minute. We've got a website which is kindly donated by a digital company who saw what we were doing and said they loved that and really wanted to help. They gave us a website which we populated and constructed. Our website gives us lots of, or provides lots and lots of information, lots and lots of detail about what gardeners can do to make a difference to their garden and help soften the impact or help mitigate climate change. So we run a website. We go and give a lot of talks to community groups, the kind of face-to-face version of what we're doing now. So we've got lots of those lined up in this coming year. As I said, we've got four face-to-face ones this week and one digital one, which is almost finished now. So it talks to community groups and so on. We've got a stand that we take to events. That's us in the green T-shirts. And so we go to gardening fairs or eco fairs or village fetes and so on. And we engage with the public about what they do in their garden and what they could change and so on. So that's always good fun. It's always great, talking with the public about what they're doing and hearing their concerns and hearing their experiences. We learn so much from that. We also get involved with projects. Yesterday, we were at a large housing development on the edge of Cambridge here, close to where I live. And we're working with a sort of community liaison officer, having workshops there for the residents in this big new development to sort of encourage sustainable practices in their garden. That's part of the kind of mission really of the local authority, and they've got us on board to help with that. So we're running some workshops there for the residents. And as well as going out and doing all this stuff, we want to understand gardeners better and discover or understand their behavior and their choices better. So we do surveys and so on. When we talk to a gardening club, we also have questionnaires that they fill in about what they do and what they'd like to do and what works for them and what doesn't. So, and that helps us fine tune our message to the community. So just very, very finally, so this is us, climate change gardening. Our aim is to sort of engage with Britain's 20 odd million gardeners, 25 million, depending on who you believe, and encourage them to do stuff with their garden that's going to help, with the climate and biodiversity crises. And the nice thing about the measures that we talk about is most of them are pretty easy to do. They don't cost much. It's great if you can get an electric car, but they take some investment. Whereas leaving some of your lawn to grow long, or doing something with your compost, or planting another tree, by comparison, is something you can just do next weekend, and it will have a very positive effect on climate change and biodiversity. So anyway, there's our web address and website, worth a look if you're interested in this stuff. And basically, I think that's the end of what I want to say. So, Graham, I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to the group as a whole and hand it back to you.
Oh, very kind. And Clive, thank you so much for a very fascinating bunch of things. And I see the first hand has already go up for questions. But also, if you get a spare moment, Clive, there's a whole bunch of questions and comments in the chat for the Zoom.
Okay.
And let me pass on to Gary Ford for the first question, please.
Hi, thanks for that, Clive. That's really good. I've got actually quite a few questions, but so just a couple. First of all, you said like you attend events and goes to shows and stuff. What's your geographical spread? How far away are you kind of planning on going with these? What kind of areas you're covering? So I'm guessing you're not a national organisation quite yet. And another thing I just wanted to ask about was
I'll deal with that one, because otherwise I'll forget it.
Okay.
So I'll deal with that first, and then your second point. Geographically, so I live in Suffolk. We're 5 trustees. They're all based in Suffolk or Cambridgeshire. So we tend to cover that area basically. Not because we're not interested in the rest of the UK, but we only became a charity last year, and we absolutely are in the process of, I wouldn't say recruiting, but attracting more members and perhaps even potential trustees in the future, so that we can extend our message further. But so East Anglia is what we cover at the moment. We did have one trip out to Shropshire for a special event we were invited to last year. But yeah, we're sort of East Anglia based. But yeah, that's not to say that we couldn't go elsewhere. Our website, of course, is national, well, international, really. So, Gary, what was your second point? Right.
I think Gary's on mute.
Gary's on mute now.
I think
Okay.
he is on
Back
mute.
to you, Graham.
No, he's not on mute. He's lost his sound. Let's come back to Gary when he gets his sound back. In the meantime, Madeline Fraser's got a hand up. And Madeline is there
Yeah,
she goes.
just unmuted.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I'm very keen on this idea. Do you have things like stickers and display items for illustrating where gardens are taking part in becoming part of a nature reserve? I only ask because what I'm trying to do at the moment in Buckden, which is in Cambridgeshire, is to get people to sign up to become part of Buckden's local nature reserve using their garden. And I want to put a map up and put stickers on where people are taking part. And I've also heard that apparently people get bin stickers and things like that. And I'm just wondering whether, rather than me trying to source things, whether as a charity you've done that sort of thing already.
Yeah, good question. I hadn't heard of a kind of sticker arrangement for individual households to say I'm part of the, the village, the village nature reserve thing. I'm aware of villages that have organised this through their not stickers, but organised a kind of coming together of individual households through their parish council or through their nature group or whatever it is. And I've seen villages that have got a map. What's that called? Is it Parish Online, I think? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so using Parish Online to map participating gardens, but I'm not aware of a sort of off-the-shelf sticker thing, Madeline, that you can stick on your wheelie bin or put in your front window to say I'm on board with it. But it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll have to contact you because I didn't know you existed, and as we're Cambridgeshire and we're going to have an eco event in June, I'll have to see if what your availability is. So
Right.
I will
Okay.
be.
You can contact me through that website, the
Yes.
www.website thing. So there's a contact us button there.
Thank you very much.
I see Gary is back online with us, but before we go back to him with questions, let me just follow on that comment about Parish Online. Andrew Clegg in Martock is hosting a banter session this coming Friday, which is going to discuss specifically how do you put gardens and people working together into Parish Online. So I just mentioned that for people who would like to join the conversation, and I'm not seeing any violent signs yet from Andrew that this is not going to happen. So I take it is. So I'll put the details in the chat. But in the meantime, we'll go back to Gary if we couldn't just deal with Myrta first before she loses her sound again. And you need to, there you go. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much. It's very interesting. I have a few things that might be interesting to add. So one of the issues with climate change is with drought, plants hold on to nectar, which makes them not available for the pollinators that are around. So sometimes the flowers seem to be in flower, but they're actually not available to the pollinators you want them to be available to. So that is always a bit of an issue during drought. So one way to conquer this is, of course, choosing your planting right. And for that, it's all keeping moisture in the soil, as you pointed out before, or being able to water with your quart water. What I think is quite an exciting idea is the sand planting and the scree gardens. Peter Korn from Sweden, he's very strong on that. And Beth Chatto Gardens, they are trying to see how it can be implemented in the south of England. What you get is that if you go to a beach, the top is dry, and if you dig down underneath, it's quite wet. And that is the sand can actually retain quite a lot of moisture. And as such, you have to water less. So these are gardens that are built up with a lot of a big layer of sand and crushed concrete, can be recycled concrete. And they retain a lot of moisture actually. And the plants that grow in there, they grow longer roots. And as such, they are more resilient to climate change. And also they are able to let go of that nectar once there is a drought. So I think that is something that can be also advised to people, not only because of this, but also the more pioneer stage habitats are quite in demand. For example, for the solitary bees, the mining bees. So there's quite a restriction on populations for nesting habitats for the more pioneer species. And I think with sand planting and these scree gardens, actually you would add this habitat to the gardens, and even if just 5% of the gardens have a patch of this, that could already make quite a difference to local populations of, for example, the solitary bees, but there's also other solitary wasps and all kinds of ground critters that would be much appreciative of this. Something else that I think is quite important is taking account, if you're advising about biodiversity friendly gardens, is artificial light. Because the more people start enjoying gardens, the more they think that should be enjoyable at all times of the day. But there are downsides to introducing artificial lights in gardens. And at the moment, people think they're going very green with the solar panel lights in the gardens. They are very cheap. They can be put into your garden and every night turn themselves on, but they can have quite an effect on moths, for example, but also other species. And last thing, the effect of artificial fertilizers, which I think is also something to name when we're talking about climate resilient gardens, because the addition of the artificial fertilizers can affect the carbon storage potential of, for example, grasslands, which is, I think, also just something to people don't think about that. And I think if people know about it, they can take it into account, and they are quite open to that, but they need to know what kind of effects those situations can have. So that was my addition.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much, Merton. Loads of good ideas there. So that's terrific. And just to pick on one little point there, you said about if only 5% of people do something. I think that's the point of this gardening. There's 20 odd million gardeners in the UK. 5% is still a million. And as you say, if a million people put a sand garden in their garden, or a sand patch, sand bed in their garden, then suddenly that's a great big difference. And I think that's the point of what we're trying to do, is that with 20 odd million gardeners, even if only one person in 20 or even one person in 100 does some of these things, that still adds up to quite a lot. Anyway, so great points. Thank you, Myrta. Yeah.
Gary, I haven't forgotten you, just coming to you in a second. I just wanted to follow on from Myrta's comments that the recordings and everything that we're doing today go into the Great Collaborations knowledge base. And the more people can put actual links into the chat about what they've been speaking, then those links go into the knowledge base, which makes it very much easier to find them in the future. So if you happen to have any links, Myrta, to the topics that you were talking about, please, we'd love to see them in the chat and go from there. And now I do need to go back to Gary. Jane, if you could bear with us, because the poor guy has been sitting there waiting to get his 1,400 more questions in.
Yeah, it's not quite that many. Can you hear me though?
Yes.
Good. Well, it's a good job that I've been on mute because I've just had a pond delivered. So there was quite a racket going on here. So it's kind of just following on a bit from Myrta's point, actually. It was a question about, like, are you highlighting chemical use generally, you know, pesticides, herbicides, all that kind of thing, in terms of like reducing those help biodiversity, of course, and of course help with climate change impact because the chemicals come with a carbon footprint. So those highlighted. And I just wanted to make another point, if I may, about peat. It's worth highlighting as well that although peat compost in bags is being phased out, a lot of peat is still being used for all the pot plants that people are buying from garden centres and stuff. So it's quite good to kind of highlight that as an issue and look for kind of peat-free versions of those as well.
Yeah,
Great.
both good points. Yeah, to be honest, at the moment, you know, absolutely, we're not in favour of pesticide use, you know, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides, and so on in gardens. We kind of much prefer, and I don't know if this is the right thing yet. There's so much to talk about in our little organisation with our 5 trustees. You know, every time we get together, we totally overrun in terms of time on the agenda we've got. We're trying to give positive encouragement and support in positive directions rather than telling people to stop using stuff. I mean, I know we do talk about peat, but even then, you know, there's a very clear alternative. You know, we encourage people to go peat free rather than say don't go near peat. But it amounts to the same thing. But yeah, we don't actively campaign against pesticide use. And there are other organisations that do that, and you know, more power to their elbow. But you know, we try to take a positive nudge approach with everyday gardeners, you know, rather than saying don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. But I totally get it. You know, gardeners shouldn't be using this stuff in their gardens, and there's a lot, you know, there's a lot that supermarkets and so on can do, should do, must do, really, in terms of restricting the sales of that stuff. I was in a supermarket at the weekend. Was it? Or was it even on? Anyway, yeah, it was at the weekend. I took a photograph of the display of pesticides on sale in the supermarket, so we can use it in our talks and outreach and so on, really. But yeah, we're still developing. We are fine tuning and polishing the nature of our activities. You know, but at the moment we are supporting and encouraging rather than banning and prohibiting and sort of criticizing. But hopefully that all ends up in the same place. So that's it on that. Yes.
Let me just take a pause to check with Jane Carr. Did you had your hand up and then I chopped you off? Have you lost interest in talking to us, Jane, or would you like to ask a question? No, she's frozen. Okay, so she's lost contact briefly. Gary, did you have more, or would you like to give Alan Wilson a go? We lost Gary as well. So Alan, it's your chance by default.
Right, I'm going to jump in straight away then. Clive, have you contacted your local nature recovery strategy officer at the county council where you live and made your organisation known to them?
Yes, we have.
Brilliant.
We are. I think we're down as a stakeholder for that, for the Cambridgeshire one. Yeah, that they contacted us. We were talking at an event, and they made themselves known to us, and we had a good chat. And so we've contributed to the feedback about, you know, priorities and so on. You know, I was in Cambridgeshire actually. Yeah, thank
Brilliant.
you.
No,
And
everybody around the country needs to be aware that there is something like this going on, and it's that linkage, those linkages that are needed to actually make this work even better for the county and nature as a whole. Thank you.
great. And Alan, I see you're from Shropshire. We came to the Whitchurch Blackberry Fair in the autumn. Great event. Yeah. So well done,
Brilliant.
Whitchurch. Well done, Shropshire.
Yeah, we got a load of stuff going on. If you want to have a look at other stuff, look at RSVP, which is restoring roadside verges in Shropshire.
Uh-huh.
So that's another one just to throw in. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm going to
good.
bow out and let other people talk. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Amanda, it's wonderful to see you here. I was getting worried that we were going to go through a session without a question from you, but there's your opportunity. Would you like to pitch in, please?
Now, having said what I said in the chat about my leg and the spider bite from the gardening, um, my question in the chat was whether climate change meant I was more likely to get more spider bites in the future. But anyway, that is a joke, because that is what makes the banter sessions banter. My pointer that I put my hand up for was just to say, if you're in a protected landscape, one of the national landscapes, as was AONB's, or national parks, you may well have dark skies policies and other policies that will really help a group or a council or a organisation that's trying to make this happen in an even bigger context than the local nature recovery strategy alone. So I know we've just voted on and approved an update on our dark skies policy, and that doesn't just include what big organisations can do, such as highways, lighting, etc. But it also gives guidance on what might happen at a very local level, and including what parish councils can be encouraged to do to put in their neighbourhood plans and so on. So it's just another pointer there. And thank you so much for the presentation.
My pleasure. No, and good point. Yeah, about ANOBs. Yeah, thank you.
Nice to see you, Amanda, or not to see you, depending on how it was. Hazel, you're up next. Good morning to you. You need to unmute, Hazel.
One, I had posted a little poster I made, and also our local councils, I can't remember the lady's name, I'm sorry, but was asking about what you can put up as a poster or a note. Our council had some little signs that were on, little round signs that on a poster on the sides of the roads and in areas where we were growing wildflowers, which said, pardon the weeds, we're feeding the bees. And there was another one which I can't remember right just now. And also I have a question. I've got two lovely water butts, but every year we have to empty them because slugs get in them, and that smells putrid, and I don't like to use the water. So is there a way I can stop slugs? I mean, how are they getting in? Please.
Okay. Well, we've had a lot of questions on our stand at gardening events since we've been doing this. We haven't had one yet about slugs in water butts. So I guess the question for me would throw it back to you is, how do you think they're getting into the water butt? You know, they won't be getting in through the tap because presumably the tap's turned off. Is the lid ill? Has it got a lid on it? And if it hasn't, then then it should do, really, from the point of view of child safety and so on, and even birds. Birds will sometimes fall into a water butt and can't get out, and squirrels even. One of my water butts, before we put lids on ours, we found a squirrel that had fallen in and couldn't get out. So tight-fitting lid, I'd say, if that's not kind of an obvious answer, but that's what I'd say. Fit a lid, and hopefully the slugs will stay out of it.
Thank you. I will endeavour to put some tape around the top of the lid.
Okay, that sounds good. Yes.
But thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Jane. I hope your sound is now back with you. And you're on mute at the moment.
It was the whole computer froze, I'm afraid. It tends to do that from time to time. I had to go out and come back in again. I just wanted to, I put it in the chat, but I wanted to just bring people's attentions to two very useful places. My no-dig gardening guru is Charles Dowding, and you can find him. He has a website, and he does a lot of stuff on YouTube, creating new beds, and he runs a what you call it, he grows veg for people, you know, he runs a market garden, all no dig, and he tells you all about it all the time and gives you all sorts of tips at different times of the year. He's my absolute guru for no dig gardening. And the other one is We Are the Ark. I got sepsis about 6 years ago, and round about this time of year. And as I was recovering, I was sitting in my house, not being able to do anything, and looking at my garden just becoming a wilderness. And then I found We Are the Ark, who are basically advocating, don't fight with nature, but leave your garden not completely wild, because it's not wild, and therefore management is important. But go and look at We Are the Ark, because it's just fascinating. And that's the sign that I intend to put on my garden, is the ARK stands for Acts of Regenerative Kindness. And it's to do basically with being regenerative in your garden and being kind to all the non-human life that wants to use your garden as well. So I've put them both in the chat so that people can link to them. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jane. Yeah, very helpful.
I'm delighted to tell you we entered the space age. Someone somewhere has got a beep going on that sounds like the Apollo missions to the moon.
It's
Wonderful.
mine. It's the answer phone saying you've got a message. You've got a message.
Oh, I thought we'd got new technology with us. Okay, well, anybody else got any questions that I can't see people's head nodding or frantic hand waving? May I say that thank you, Clive, for generating so much interest and getting us going. And you've obviously really turned people towards putting some wonderful hints into the chat. Thank you very much for everyone's contributions. They're looking tremendous, and they will go up in the knowledge base at some point in the next few days. And I guess we're going to have to call that a day. I've got people knocking on my door telling me it's time to go away on this, whatever this holiday thing is. So we'll see you all next time. And thank you all very much for coming today. And thank you, Clive, for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Great to see you all. Yeah.
Now, I should just actually take a second to let everybody know what's coming up next week. And I can even manage to tell you that, which is a whole new step forward for me. So on the 19th of March, we're going to be talking or getting presented by Becky Lovegrove from Frome about the Green and Healthy Frome, which is a partnership with all sorts of people in the Frome area, where to get funding from, what to do with it, and that sort of thing. So hopefully it'll be very helpful to everybody who's trying to work out how their parish council or their community organisation or their town council can get things rolling on this. And next week we should be able to do just that. So I hope you'll all join us again, and thank you very much for making today such a success. Have a great time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.